Many times I could have disembarked from my ancient raft, yet the old wagon floated well, and from a tree branch I'd even fashioned an oar of sorts. Nothing to brag about, but breaking it at the correct angles, it served a purpose that suited me well. Witnessing dawn on the coming morning by painfully straining my two eyes in order to see from underneath a pair of very swollen eyebrows, only to see the morning's first light reveal a disaster of unimaginable proportions, whilst still banging around through the countryside on my floating barge. Somehow my small ship had been gathered up by the swift flowing waters of a much greater river, perhaps a tributary, a tributary to the Potomac. I was heading back towards the front lines of war, I reckoned, heading towards a place of even greater death and despair. But surely it was destined to intensify. It crossed my mind to wonder about the Voile boys, whether the soldiers had them captive or not. Not for long, I soon reasoned. Following that issue, I dreadfully feared for their safety, as they could have no way of knowing about Herman's strength, or of his power to quickly kill many of them, and then disappear somewhere, as he was totally an immortal like his father Vermin. His powers could be brought on quite easily, I now believed. He might kill them all, I figured. And what of the full moon cycle that was coming for him? It would be a disaster for all, a complete bloodbath for Union and rebel soldiers alike. Never has he had so many willing participants so close by. Killing was in his nature, and the human being was his virtual prey. I reasoned that both of their fates belonged to the wind, the moon, and the stars, and that I could not change destiny. Yet my life was held intact only by this waterlogged wagon that currently kept my heart beating and my mind still active and alive. So I paddled on, dodging everything upstream that I could see, even the wild beaver and the swelled bodies of the dead critters that were carried to the surface by the undercurrents of the moving stream. By afternoon, and about half a mile upstream from my floating wagon, a stream of darkened smoke puffed from the tumid bank, growing in size while gently rising up, and finally gone into the humid air, lost to the hanging branches of the nearby weeping willows. The river was in certain bends and turns swallowed completely by the hardwoods and other greenery that had long since boldly marched onto the waterway's once shallow and sandy banks, but now left enough space for a nice-looking solitary campsite. One that I headed for with all my rowing might, against all odds, fighting the strength of a mighty current. A mockingbird imitated the sound of my boyish whistle as I approached, sending it reverberating into the crook near my shallow scuttling craft. A woman's clothing hung from a wounded tree branch, with a brown European squirrel standing bulwark, ready to defend her honor with great pride, while holding his ground aloft. He resented my coming there, and showing it by presenting his skinny little claws before such a lowly human being like me, while sharing a grisly snarl that proved to be permanently set upon his battered and wrinkled little snout towards me. Bewildered and still splashing some water around with my moccasin-covered feet, a very kind voice interrupted from afar and ended my meeting with the fearsome tree creature abruptly. There was a young black and very beautiful woman overlooking our chatter session. She had been picking some exiled blackberries from the surrounding lumber land, stealing wholeheartedly from each living stem a wholesome bounty of fruit, both for herself and her adopted fur buddy. Our very dedicated squabbling with loud, piercing voices had disrupted her lullabies and travels, from where she hastily returned back to the long-awaiting river's edge. "And who are you, that the walnut eater dislikes you so much?" she asked with her keyed voice, that was still in tune, pretending never to have been singing a song or praise that I might have overheard. Her long black satin-like hair draped only to fall gently onto her lovely breasts in front. "Excuse me, ma'am," was all that I could muster for words as my tongue became like a spoiled whip at the end of a long cattle roundup. "You okay?" I asked of her, like a timid sheep that might bellow an awful sounding ah. Ah. "Yes, we are doing fine here. Ah. Me and Nutty, that is. We have held close to the shores of the Rappahannock River and have lingered in the woods since last year's cold went farther north, far, far away from us," she replied, while being somewhat relieved that an ounce of danger had quickly passed from our meeting. Like strangers, this I could easily identify in her. "I guess I'll be leaving now. Oh, farther down the river I'll go." I had to say it to her, being so polite and all, even though it was the last thing on my mind as I backed into the river from where she came. "Don't go," hesitantly she spoke, as if Nutty needed me as a friend and not her. "The woods are frightening during the night. I have heard things out there. You know, the blood-curdling type of sounds? It frightens Nutty. Sometimes I wonder if I shouldn't go for the towns where the white folk reside. At least I might feel safe there." "You'd be somebody's slave, you know." It came out of me so quickly. Then I frowned, and I quickly hid my eyes from her. Yet she accepted my words very well. "Yeah, maybe for a while. Then I would leave again for another part of the woods. Maybe I'd head farther west as the crow flies, where the black people are somewhat freed now, you know, from the seceders, the slaves. I'm tired of dealing with the anger of other people, especially white folks," she said. "I've been a slave all my life, and I have seen what being a ruler does to common folk. It's not good. God did not mean for life to be spread out like that. You know, from one to the other. It's wrong. I could live here on these riverbanks, just me and my squirrel friends, and be quite happy and content. No problems forever," she told me. "Forever is a very long time," I said. Yet tension had a hold of me, and I felt insecure from my thoughts because for sure I knew there could be human anger at hand. "You're a fine-looking young man, tall, strong, and handsome, but you're also white. How could someone like you ever love a black person like me? I was once a slave." A part of her honestly wondered, but she knew it was mainly a delusion of hers to think that way. "You're quite beautiful, ma'am. You have long, wonderful legs and dainty feet to support your wonderful figure of a woman. The sweetest facial features, and I am deeply entranced with your beauty. Can't you tell by my behavior? Yes, I am fascinated with you and suffering from an extreme desire for you. You see, I have never had a woman like yourself, you know, to care for me in such ways." I said with a slight sneer perched on my face, ready for anything to happen. Her frustration began to fade because she sensed that I was not like everyone else. I was slightly different and possibly, maybe even an honest man, and she knew it.
What is your name? She asked me.
Seth is my name, and my mother gave it to me. Yet, there may be more. She and my father are both dead, you see. I reluctantly answered her. Moments of silence passed while she thought about my demeanor, and then she guessed the tragedy of my early years in life. Perhaps caring enough not to make me relive those moments, she stopped the questioning.
So what are you doing here in this place, in this time and place, Seth?
She asked of me another very difficult question, very hard to answer quickly. Such deepness would be instantly required. But this time, she had been watching me like a starved sparrowhawk might watch a prairie rat from a simmering hot barrel cactus, perhaps trying to find some confusion that might lie within my mind. I had to come up with something to say. Traveling here and there, you know, kind of homeless. Maybe even I'll join the war to fight for freedom. I really don't know. I finally gathered an answer smartly. Guess I'll be leaving now, I boldly stated to her, and shouldn't have.
Yeah, I guess you will.
She had to say before pausing her sentence with a short moment of silence.
But then,
she extended her words out while she crawled her first finger along her pretty face next to her temple, holding the tension up to a high level as it grew also inside of me.
Unless, of course, you want to sleep the night out in the sand right here upon my cozy little island paradise. Besides, in the darkness, that mean old river and its tricky currents will only carry you to a young death. A drowning death would be horrible, I suppose.
She carried on, knowing that he might certainly die against the swirling dangers of the river. Can I stay here with you for a while? I asked of her in a sheepish voice and timid manner.
Certainly, you're welcome here. Most of the critters here on this island do not care about travelers, except those of the glen, of course, which are full of feistiness like the badgers. It is still early in the day, perhaps an hour before dusk. Come help me gather some firewood,
she offered. Yes, ma'am, I quickly said to her as she turned and walked away, proceeding further inland, leaving me to drag and dock the floating wagon at the water's edge, where a catfish dodged in the mud, with his tail fin brushing it at the stern. The island was full of insect life, and the atmosphere vibrated from their essence and sounds that they made. A constant hum occurred from the locusts that filled the island forest and riverbank, as thousands of them were hiding in the dense foliage of the place, yet so very keenly camouflaged from the hideousness of the flesh-eating praying mantis that might attack them later that night, devouring them. The water caressed the island as it flowed along the banks behind me. Now, as I had deserted it for a short while, preferring to follow her meandering foot tracks through the wooden thickets and trees. Her tracks were easy to follow since the full-grown woman can with her toes dig into the wet sand. Besides, the largest toe of her right foot curved inward, just slightly, making them very unique as a pair and easy to identify. Huh. A beautiful disappearing woman, a castaway, I thought while following the trail that took me inland to places unknown. So very magnificent and splendid to behold was this small island that lies somewhere in the Southern Territory, maybe even inside a Confederate state. The lushness of the tall grasses that grew in the nearby swamp distilled an enchanting moment for me as the reflected light from a nearby pond escaped through the tall blades and sharpened my eyes with the receding sunlight during this warm summer evening. The bleeding heat from the sun had intensified slightly after midday, and finally now it was beginning to lessen some as the nearest star in the heavens began to dissolve into the western horizon. Yet I still dripped sweat from every pore in my body. Lacking a cooling breeze, I found a shade tree to rest my liquid drained body and to think about the confounded woman for whom I had recently become so bewildered with. Who was she? Curiosity caused me to wonder for sure. Escaped slaves can be treated very badly in these parts for no good reason, and there was still a bounty for the women folk. It didn't matter to me that much, personally, but what about her? If she were an escapee, then all the more reason for me to help her if I could. At that very moment, I began to feel the intensity of it all. Slavery, ownership of another person, and suddenly it hit me to the bone of how wrong it all was. A tear poured out of my eye, and I wasn't even crying. It just happened that way. What moral right did one human have to own another person's body to use for his own work, bidding, or desires? I believed soon after that moment that I had become an abolitionist. Later, I knew it was true. My sense of morality was offended, even by the thought of it. Later, I knew that there would be much more to understand about slavery and punishment before I might see the end of it all, if ever possible. A breeze erupted out of the south that shook the sycamore tree directly above me. The moving wood relaxed my mind ever more with its creaking sounds until finally sleep came into me under the tree. Dreams that come and go from a person, even when they are sleeping under a shade tree, filled my resting mind that day around dusk. In my dream, I saw a field full of cotton crop with many black pickers present while gathering there to harvest a bounty from its puffy boils of cotton, while they also spoke a budding southern secessionism, and I overheard it all as two young black men were speaking in a partly hushed manner while picking. What do you think about our southern lords trying to fight against the North and the fighting man, President Lincoln? A much larger man asked. You mean the President Freedom? Some folks say that he's secretly like an abolitionist kind of man, a very complicated sort of fella. Let us hope for sure. They both snickered quietly. It's like chitlins and beans. When you get a pot to boiling, later on the beans take a good taste from the gut. But it has to boil for a while before getting there to a pleasant sapidity. You mean it tastes great, right? Both men laughed after the other slave smartly inquired. Yeah, for some folks. Others say that it smells bad and turns their nose up and downright stinks. But not everybody, the other responded, while removing a burr from his injured thumb. A black crow from overhead that was diving in and out of furrows had gathered up a passel of stick and twig and carried it into flight, heading northwest towards Richmond, leading the way for me as my mind soared along as well. The shock from seeing the vision of a burning city suddenly awoke me from my sleep. I opened my eyes from a vision of time and progress and found myself in the realm of darkness. Yet the gentle, smooth sound from the leaves whispering in the cottonwood trees nearby calmed me down for a moment to reflect from my dream and to presently gather my good senses. The water of a nearby pond sent a prism of starlight through the trees, and my eyes gathered the reflected light against the darkness that could not contain it. I pilfered some dried logs and short sticks from a place that was not too long ago a bog, and they broke with a loud crack before being dumped into the sunken terrain. I discovered to use for a fire pit. Some wooden matches I kept dry from the river water served to light the fire that now burned away, cindering insects in flight. I figured my lone fire could be seen for miles away, yet I was willing to bravely sit next to it, seeking the warmth from it with my hands nonetheless. An hour or two passed, and I had no way of knowing for sure, with no moon in the sky to study. The surrounding darkness was like a jungle cage, as sometimes creepy sounds would interrupt my serenity. Flickering eyes revealed a presence from within a darkened tree shadow, following the hoot of an owl. The firebugs energized the fresh foliage, and the place had finally become lucid after disturbing its critter normality from my humanly presence and the overwhelmingly intrusion of a burning fire. I was finally beginning to relax again when something unexpected happened. First there was a clamoring down by the riverside, a man's voice, and then a response came from others. I suspected they might be traveling on downstream at first, but wanted to find out more. I remembered the trail almost by heart because I had grown up in the wilderness of the West and retraced my earlier passage to the shore. The river that fed downward from inland of New York, James, Peninsula, and finally released water to the sea was overflowing again and still rising while being pressurized further upstream by a thunderstorm that I had spotted crawling through the northern skies just before dusk. But there came much more than just water from behind me out of the Chesapeake Bay. I was totally shocked to see hundreds, seemingly thousands of ships of all sorts converging upon the inland's bay. Steam pouring from some of them that carried larger gun and cannon outfits, while Union soldiers peered over many ships' bow, while also yelling with navigational orders to the ship's captain, so that he may level out their gangplanks for the horses, mules, and even then supplies of all kinds and other mechanisms of warfare. I was a vagabond to them, nothing more it seemed, as I stood by watching the parade of men helping themselves to the nearby sandy shores belonging to the peninsula of hell. An hour quickly flew by as some stern steamers continued to float only farther up into the bay, looking for Fort Monroe to harbor. Shallow gullies and natural harbors were the choice for much smaller ships to drop their steel-framed wooden plank gates, finding empty coves and shallow troughs along the crowded waterline. In a mirror reflection from the waters beneath the boat's hull, I sometimes studied their crew members doing their jobs aboard the ships. It seemed magical to me just to see it all that way. A side door was intentionally left ajar by the workers of the furnace to fend off some of the heat coming from the shovel loads of coal that they had just fed into the hot burning ovens. Gravity, being a relentless foe, would soon turn back the trajectories of the burning ash cinders, spoiling an escape for them from the towering exhaust stacks that were always blanketed with a pitch black layer of soot. Yet, to my excitement, many a frolic in sparkles that could escape farther from the earth flew from the mighty stacks and were set to frolicking by a warm breeze that forced them to rise aloft to hide within the black willow trees. The Lady Mac's first intention was to anchor nearby the shoreline while still in bay, although last-minute plans were made and full stern maneuvered the craft into a deep enough bayou that was nearby. Soon the soldiers threw out a long wooden plank that shot from the hull like an arrow released from its bow until it plowed into the sandy beach. Surprisingly, the first person was an older man, dressed well for working, and he proudly stood at the top of the plank, looking down and then finally towards me. He came forward until I reached the bottom, just in time, when one of the other soldiers yelled for Henry, and he answered jubilantly, as if something exciting was about to happen. "Yes, damn it, what do you want?" he replied as a valiant old semi-retired soldier would do. He was well educated in the art of fighting and had no fear of his fellow troops, and it clearly seemed that he despised none of those present. I wondered why he was allowed to tag along with the Army of the Potomac because of his age, though some of the soldiers had already begun using him to help unload the cannons that were now being pulled ashore. He spoke of the Third Seminole Indian War and others that had happened before it, while still working alongside of them. A half-drowned soldier lost his blue cap into the water while tugging at the tow chain with the old gent. "Pull harder and don't worry about that filthy hat. It needs a good washing anyway. Let the bay clean it," he said while straining his back to move the heavy gun a little closer towards the shore. "Look there. It is stuck in the wheel. Keep pulling at it. The mules are already taken." His direction motivated the excited soldiers even further until finally they had it pulled onto the moist, sandy ground. "Let the water drain down from it while you quickly go get us some oil and rags. This is no Quaker gun, you know. It has to be dried up fast or it'll rust into muck. Quick!" he bellowed out as the young private responded by running up the plank, heading towards a supply box buried down in the galley of the ship. To my surprise, he spoke to me. I was letting the tide cleanse my feet while watching the show. "Hey, you over there. So what brings you to the Potomac, son? Are you here to fight with us?" he proposed a second question to me. His demeanor seemed that of an understanding older gent, but I couldn't help thinking for a while before trying to answer his line of questioning because I knew that I should. "Well, sir, I am a benevolent traveler from the backwoods and the wilderness of the West, not a soldier. A recent flood unearthed my old wagon, from a wealthy farmer's glen, and set the old contraption to float for me. A miracle to say the least. Handfuls of good luck have spared my life and finally had brought me here to this place, where I am, luckily, still alive, and all in one piece. I spoke zestfully. What kind of work do you like doing, or are good at? If I am not intruding, he asked in a mannerly fashion. I'm a gold hunter, one that meanders along the many streams and river basins, looking to inspect certain shiny objects that later on might yield $1 or two at the local assayer's office, or allow for the purchase of a warm blanket from the trader's scale. Chemical refining of the precious metal I do by trade. You see, my father's education and training in chemistry allowed me to learn from his past, and my wealth of unbridled curiosity set me to learning from early on about metallurgy and of the wonderful minerals yet hidden deep inside the Rocky Mountains, you know. Have you chosen to fight on the side of the war yet? I see that you are indeed old enough to carry a rifle, he observed. Sir, it has been a shame of unmeasurable magnitude, but I'm afraid that we were unable to receive much mail back home about this Civil War and its recent news events. I am respectfully not up to date with the purpose. It all kind of perplexes me to some degree, even now. You see, back home we fight with the Apache and other Indians. I haven't learned about it, or I've heard enough to make me want to join into it. He seemed somewhat perplexed for a moment, and I thought he might as well go ahead and frown. But he didn't. And then he said to me, son, I'm an ornery old fool and a tired old man, the kind that follows along behind the young soldiers to help them prepare for the battle because they let me. Still seeking glory at my old age. I've been a soldier all of my life and a fool to some degree as well. Always being the first in line for the fight has earned me a reputation, and it follows me everywhere I go because of that unfortunate trait. These men that you see working against the sea to unload their machinery of war, they are no different in many ways, and I believe that they are not so understanding as I am at this very moment. You must choose to either be friend or foe, you see. It's important that you do so quickly because your life will be in danger otherwise. It would be a good day to join with the Union and to become a soldier. You should talk to the captain pretty soon. Can you read and write? He asked as part of his recruitment spiel he just offered to me. Like a scholar, I replied, but wasn't exactly sure why I did, or quite certain what was coming on next. My name is Henry, by the way, and what is yours? He happily asked me, as if I'd already just joined with the Union Army. Seth is my name, my first name, Seth Allen from Sherwood Meadows. I boldly stared, as if he might know something of my home and its particular natural wonders. Sounds like some very good scenery to keep stored up there in your mind. Good thoughts can be a lifesaver because you never know when there might come a time when you need some pleasant ideas to steal from. Man, in this country, good memories are more valuable than is gold. Well, I'll see you around. It's going to be days before we get everything planted on solid dirt, he said, while holding on to a smile and staring out at the mass confusion already beginning to arise from his absence out there. Suddenly, his interest in the landing party was overwhelming, and so he whisked himself away like the wind. I could not imagine a stealthier old man at the time. He moved with so much ease, like a younger man would. The place was becoming crowded with machinery, and had become an arena lit by oil lanterns and huge burning fires. Many soldiers were busy stomping around the place, and soon my campsite area had become filled with metal boxes and the hardware to construct field tents. Soon after the invasion of my campsite, I could see where all of this was leading. Firstly, I had no desire to become a soldier, and before the sun came up, I had slithered away into the night, heading towards the north like a wounded snake, delving into the enhanced jungle to avoid captivity. Secondly, there was something that I had to do. I had made it for some time by traveling at night up the peninsula, avoiding the Union bluecoats with careful acts of stealth and camouflage. It was not easily accomplished, since they numbered in the hundreds of thousands, yet they always gathered as an army and made camps with smoldering fires. Months flew by, and I reckoned sometime in the month of May I'd managed to travel far enough from the Chesapeake Bay to settle down nearby a settlement called the White House along the Pamunkey River. It was cold for a morning in May, and I considered that it might possibly rain again. And it did early on. Large plantations that were spread out for miles and miles following along the river began flooding from the water that it came from the clouds. I could no longer hide in the wet foliage very well because the countryside had begun to fill with the bodies of the troubled folks, moving away from there to avoid conflict with the Yankees. The tempers of the displaced Southerners had reached into the red zone, so I kept my distance from all that I could, and the rain made it somewhat possible. I followed a slave trail along the shoreline of the river until I discovered an old wooden loading dock being used for a side-wheeled transit ferry. The sound of its paddle wheels slopping into the water near the other side of the river meant I might rest for a moment amongst the other migrants already filling the dock platform. A young Southern belle, an Indian native, perhaps in her early 20s, gathered a seat on the platform next to me. She carefully let her legs dangle above the flowing water to view her reflection next to mine. I looked into the depths of the water, seeking out some rainbow trout that might be jetting for bugs in the shallow parts, but I saw none. Though a channel catfish caught my eye while patrolling the bottom, his dark silhouette filled inside a beam of light that struck the water from over in the deeper portion. The Southern Indian girl noticed it too and said something about it.
My heavens, did anyone see that blue catfish down there? It could have taken my big toe off easily,
she commented sarcastically. I saw it, I replied energetically without thinking too much.
Oh well, there's plenty more out there, believe me. Say, are you from around these parts? You look different than us. Your clothes are odd for this side of the Mississippi. Son, are you a Westerner? I know you're not from the north. Well, you wouldn't be here in this place right now, alive and intact.
That is?
That is.
She was beautiful and curious, and I liked her melodious voice and the way she asked me about myself. You got it, I replied with no fear.
You're a long way from the west. Do you know what is happening around you with these people and their lives? She looked strangely at me while asking me the question.
Yes, it's a shame, I told her, and she understood. And she understood that I meant every word.
I shouldn't be leaving this place. It's my home. Grandfather forced me to go off the reservation. You see, I am a Pamunkey, or at least partly. He was afraid for me because I'm attractive, especially to the young soldiers from the north. And he told my mother that I must go west. But where?
She gave me another look, but this one was quite different than the earlier gesture while she spoke. Yes, but where? The West is big, even bigger than the South. Towns are separated by many miles of vast wilderness, much different than here. And you must survive the heat and the wind and much more. Are you here to cross the Pan Monkey? Using the ferry boat? I inquired as it arrived and a plank was dropped onto the dock.
Come on, she said. Let us board the flatboat. He takes only donations because of the times. You know that a lot of people are penniless right now. If you have some money, give him some of it. Otherwise, do not worry about it. He won't care.
She somehow knew that I had no money, but also it seemed that she didn't care, and I was grateful for her mercy. Mule dong! Darned weed eaters! Gonna fill up my boat with chewed grass! The impatient attendant yelled out while grabbing a shovel, speaking to all the crowd in such a way because there was no livestock boarding his boat at the time. I'm sorry, but what is your name? I asked her while helping to load her two small bags, finally placing them along the bow of the ferry and stumbling on my own 2 feet.
Pocahontas, but my friends call me Po.
Her reply was friendly and sweet, and she knew that I probably already liked her. Po it shall be, I replied, saying little because I couldn't think of anything better to say. And then Po. What kind of work do you like doing? I asked her.
Well, I am somewhat of an engineer, an inventor kind of person. And responding to a telegram, I have an open invitation to meet someone at Richmond very soon. That person is a great aeronaut called Matthew, and he will be waiting for me there. He needs my assistance to help in designing a hydrogen generator for his fleet of army balloons. For the good of science, I am heading that way. Then I'll go to the Pacific or beyond,
she said, and left me confounded. I would be willing to travel along if you don't mind the company. I have seen enough of the South for now. Maybe I'll return after the war, and then people will be settled. I have no desire to enlist in either army, just to receive a private's pay. I'm a fine chemist. I would say about anything to be with her, but it was true. I found a friend that I could trust, but didn't let it be too obvious before her.
Yeah, a chemist, no doubt. That's good. But let it be known that I do not want any hanky-panky or stuff like that. I'm an intellectual and seeking a new life. Do you understand, Seth?
She confided and gave me a very serious gesture. You bet. I'm not like that anyway. I believe in marriage, and where I come from, women have dignity. and are to be respected always, I said, and no more was said concerning sex. The ferry boat took us to the other side of the Pan Monkey, where we all quickly disembarked, and the morning was proceeding on towards noon by then. Poe knew the countryside very well. She had grown up there, and soon we found a well-traveled road to follow alongside many other southern escapees towards the Chickahominy, somewhere north of Richmond. Long hot days finally passed, bringing our friendship even closer, and Poe had proven her merit many times to me as being someone to be trusted, even in hard instances. She had helped me develop a charade for myself, feigning absolute blindness. I carried a cane and struck those who would question my ability to see with it. The put-on lasted all the way to Gaines Farm. I could have died when I first laid eyes upon it, and it was held down by many strong tethers. So large a thing it was, and yet it floated in the air. Mr. Poe, or Mr. Lowe, Poe's good friend, said it floated because it was lighter than the air, and I marveled at the magnificent balloon and all of its wonders. I also wondered how such a thing could be held down by even such strength of ropes. Poe was ecstatic with watching it, especially when it responded to a slight breeze or the warm thermal winds that would often come through the yard. Mr. Lowe had been very hospitable to Poe and me, and had offered us a place to stay there on the farm. We were eagerly accepted. The road from Pan Monkey to here had been long and treacherous, also very challenging for our bellies, which oftentimes ached from hunger. I have to admit that mostly I was more interested in Poe than I was in hunting something down, and our stomachs would often growl and interrupt something happening just to speak to us. There was a double bunk in the building with a wood stove for evening fires in the place, and Poe had already prepared a meal with pork in the beans and cornmeal baked bread in the fire out in the yard. She had found a hinged and closed pan, and it worked superbly for the bread making in the flame. A long road that led inland from the Chickahominy River also sprouted other dirt roads towards the west and southerly towards Richmond. I had led us to this farm already weak and beaten by ruggedness of the times. The farm had the longest avenue I'd ever seen belonging to one single place. It was comfortably and picturesquely sunken into the dale that was surrounded by the slow rising hills. They covered part of the morning's landscape view with large fields lush with green grasses. I was quite proud of Poe because she was there on a mission of science, and I knew that she would stand up and fight for the invention constantly until she had won her prize. She spent a lot of time with other aeronauts, particularly Lowe, who was quite bent on creating a new method of producing a hydrogen gas, the hydrogen gas, for his balloons, and she was determined to help him do just that. Poe was already working with him on a drawing board, etching out her gypsum chalk in the form of long mathematical equations that made no sense at all to me. She was smart like no other person that I'd ever met before. People were milling around, coming out of old tattered sheds and the like. Even the main house entertained people with certain things to do, all having to do something with a balloon. Even the telegraph was now part of it.
Many of the calling were scientists from far away with an interest in the balloon. I was most shocked to find out that there were no soldiers lurking about to hold security at the farm, the kind of soldier that I had recently been avoiding so very carefully, but now was a civilian operation through and through. A large shop with a concrete floor lay in the backyard where only Poe and a few others were allowed to go. They wanted no distractions, and I couldn't blame them for that. The place smelled from boiling sulfuric acid to no end, tainting a backwards wind towards the front yard horribly. I kept my distance in the front and let Poe handle the events in the backyard shop. I approached low and caught him standing at the helm of the balloon, where he was busy tying up some loose ends with it. "Hello, can I help you with the chore, sir?" I asked him. "Yeah, hold this rope while I tighten a knot. It's coming loose," he instructed while sinking into the basket to draw hard against the lariat after forming a few ins and outs with it. Are you and Poe just friends, or is there more?" he asked me very bravely for the answer. "Ah," I cracked up. I couldn't help but reveal some of Poe's law craft. I felt that a good laugh would better explain the way she had always said to me concerning that particular topic of romance and possibly sex. He didn't know Poe that well. "You mean she's not taken up by a man? Oh, that can't be. I have never seen such a brilliant woman in all my life, and she is of the most beautiful kind," Lowe confessed while turning his eyes away, that I might discover more of his feelings for her. "Yes, sir, I know. I tried to get romantic with her from the start back on the Pamunkey while riding on a ferry boat to cross the river, but she would have nothing of it at all. She quickly set my mind in a proper sphere, you might say. Even on the trail, where it is absolutely dangerous, I have seen some strangers get a fresh straightening out. Some soldiers out there wanted her to be a pleasure whore for their outfit, but it just didn't work that way either. Somewhere out there in the Union Army, there's a soldier with a broken nose and some sore ribs, even though I suspect that he is probably healed from his wounds by now." I had revealed a private story to him, cover to cover, so that I might hide my very own feelings. I wasn't sure just why I'd begun sprouting secrets to him, but suddenly I began to feel guilty for telling him too much of the truth. "Good story, and I believe you. Don't worry. I won't mention any of it to anyone," he said, and then continued talking with me about more things. "You know, someday, Seth, I'm going to take one of these contraptions all the way across the Atlantic Ocean, and if it doesn't kill me first trying. In this life, all men, even a man such as yourself, have certain callings, beliefs that they know to be true, yet others may deny. And in my case, I feel that most people do not understand the absolute value that can come from one of these cotton balloons flying up and into the air. Both civilian and military lives will benefit. You know that the great Union generals are now suddenly beginning to realize the extreme value that my surveillance service has to offer them. The tide has also turned for civilian uses and will continue to expand rapidly into who knows what. There will be no end to the potential benefits of aerial flight as it all grows and time passes on. Maybe someday mankind will make it into space or even walk upon the moon, perhaps." I listened to what he had said, but I also was thinking that he was a unique kind of person, much like Poe, except she was no speech giver like him. I still enjoyed his company just the same. Time had passed while speaking in the yard with Matthew. I decided his amazing brilliance, and also I was learning about ballooning and navigating one using the prevailing winds. It was time consuming. Narrow shadows cast onto the ground slowly moved as the sun had finally reached a position high in the sky, closing in on a particular hour of the day, commonly called noon. I kept my eyes peeled on a certain picnic table of interest simply because I did not want to miss out on the smallest portion of lunch. I had some catching up to do with my stomach. Finally, but still on time, the front door of the large ranch house swung open and extended a catch spring to its fullest length, and out from under a narrow threshold emerged an older black lady. First, she looked out into the yard and then took a deep breath of fresh air while raising her arm high enough to grab onto a hanging cotton cord pertaining to the handle of a dinner bell. And she began to ring it loudly so that everyone could hear. We all knew that she had made a fine meal, but mostly we knew that she wanted to be appreciated for her efforts in the kitchen, which meant eating all of it down. I certainly had no problems appeasing her, or at least trying to do so by filling my belly hatch, especially under a clear blue sky. Pickled okra, catfish patties, cornbread, colored sugar water. It was all there and getting cold. She even added on many more special delicacies and had each one spread out, filling up some fine dishes. Lunch was now laid upon the picnic table for everyone to gather. Lo and the others were much too busy to sit down and eat with us, as science waits on no man. So each one of them grabbed a plate full of goodies and ate it down while still on the run. As the moon hour passed, the wonderful old black lady and I were the only ones left sitting at the table. She didn't mind it, and neither did I. "Oh, what a beautiful day it is, ma'am, even for the ballooning, but especially good for eating food," I said, and was afraid that I had interrupted her working on something very special and delicious. She cleared her throat for a second time, and then we talked. "What are you doing here, son? I know that you are from the West, maybe the Kansas territories, and so does everyone else in this place. I can tell it by your Western dialect and short speech. To a Southerner, you might as well be a Northern Yankee, or even worse, a marriage lawyer or a politician. Don't you know that these are deadly boundaries for you to be staying inside of right now? Neither the Yanks or the Rebs are going to like you very much, and I mean every word of it." She said it all so very bluntly that I might fully understand her exact intention, that I should be very careful with all people and all. Let there be no mistake about it. But she had also spoken so honestly with me that I felt at ease with her and instantly took quite a shine to her. Suddenly, from the yard, there was a sound that drew my attention, and I had to look into that direction. It was Matthew and Poe test flying a balloon that had been filled from their new invention, the hydrogen generator. "Release the cable," someone yelled. And they did. The two men on the ground were astounded when it tore away with a good wind and rose up into the air, both of them waving to the parties of scientists down below as it went higher and higher into the clouds above. It was amazing. When I saw Poe in the balloon, she was smiling like I'd never seen her before. Matthew was too busy with the operation of the craft to smile or cheer at the crowd, yet I was sure that he was ecstatic with it all. I wondered how they were going to turn back as I stood watching it disappear from sight. With no weights aboard? Later I ambled around, wondering what I might do with my time as I stared at the weights for the balloon that had not been loaded aboard. "They're not coming back, are they?" I asked the old woman, who was also flabbergasted. She looked downward and responded with only silence. It was gruesome in the afternoon sun, so I retired back to the little cabin and gathered my clothes. I was going to find them. "You better wait," yelled the old woman, just as I was heading for the field that I had crossed when I first came to this place. "There was a rifle inside the basket of the balloon. I hid it there because Matthew would not have it inside the house. I'm sure that he will find it, and we'll shoot holes in the balloon." She somehow seemed relieved by saying that. "Yeah, but even with holes in it, it could be in free flight for a very long time, even weeks," I conjectured back to her. "There was food and water, at least, plenty of both. The thing was being prepared for a transatlantic flight, you know. It just wasn't completely finished with all the weights and all." She seemed bewildered and was beginning to turn pale after speaking the words, and so was I. "Goodbye, ma'am. It's been a pleasure to make your acquaintance," I said as I tore out into the green pasture to find them. Touching my finger to the wind, I figured they had traveled a mile westerly already, and by nightfall would be far, far away. No telling how far, or what altitude for sure. Fearing the worst, it occurred to me that a balloon filled with lighter-than-air gases would certainly keep rising up ever more to greater heights up into the open sky until gravity once found it again, which could be very high. And at that altitude, there could be very strong winds, to say the least. I kept my eyes peeled on the lookout for something in the sky, but only saw blue with traces of puffy white cloud matter everywhere. I decided to retrace my journey towards the Chickahominy River, but to cut it short by heading west towards Richmond, following along the many dirt roads occupied with disgruntled Southern folks. Thoughts of the war to end slavery and social injustice I thought was far behind me, or at least I'd often hoped it was. But little did I know that there was also shamelessness in other realms. There are other places, especially in the mind. It was getting cold, and the month of November was beginning to carry a chill in the breezes, more so in the evening, right before sundown. I traveled for months on foot, trying to provide as many miles between myself and the fighting as I could by simply heading west. I'd learned from the Voile boys, who are extremely smart with natural things, to intentionally keep sunlight behind towards my back. And in this case, by doing so, I had kept my tracks heading towards the territory of Kansas. I'd already worn out 2 pair of leather boots after leaving my first pair I'd worn from home, now somewhere in the mud back in Virginia. Rather than stealing from the dead, I chose to gather my new boots from the living soldiers. while they kept slipping away inside of their warm army tents. It was easy to stealthily maneuver to their campsites during the late night and to gather things up like leftover food and half full canteens of water left outside near a dwindling campfire. On the banks of the river, 4 days' walk from the headwaters of the South Platte and over the High Divide, then I could set up for winter in the high mountain basin, perhaps finding good cover or even make a teepee of my own. Only weeks ago and back south, I had recently seen a photo of a teepee in a newspaper heading upstream, tagged into the current while flowing away in the Mississippi River. I knew that I could build one of those things if I ever needed to do it. I just had never done so before. Now the South Platte River was flowing nicely, even this late in the fall season, and no real snow was on the ground yet, or in the river to clog things up with ice. But it could have been very easily been there. I knew that I should seriously start considering holing up somewhere. The time had almost come to call it a year. But first I had to get somewhere, to a place where I wanted to be. I wanted to set roots way up high in the mountains and to live up there in the heights. Logically speaking, the game hunting was the best, like no other. At the higher elevation, I could hunt forever, or until the end of my days, at least. Likely only 4 more days of walking uphill through the mountainous terrain. And then I could be in the basin, and finally once I were there, hopefully there might still be time left before the first snowfall to possibly make a home shelter using some buffalo hides, like I have always wanted to do. I needed a weapon, and I had a good one. It was a bow and many arrows that lay in a dead Indian camp or abandoned there. It seemed as though they had just left them for me to find. From the looks of the place, I finally figured it was a smallpox abandoned camp where I found them both. Even the blankets inside every teepee had remained untouched. I regretted having to go to their graveyard. I knew that I had done something wrong, but going there and the sight of it all was horrifying to me. Whomever had to die so I could get that bow and batch of arrows, I was deeply thankful to them. I think I even said it out loud a couple of times as I was getting out of the deads area quickly. I surely meant them no disrespect, but to get where I needed to go, I had to do it. I'd spent enough time reminiscing, overly thinking, while collecting some wood. Tonight, I was going to have some scarce warmth, come hell or high water. Recently, and from afar, I'd watched other men enjoying the pleasantness of a campfire, whilst I stayed cold. But tonight was my night for it. I could hear some buffalo to my western flank, as they always were good at grunting in certain ways. Just why they'd come into the trees, I wondered. This time of evening, critters sometimes do odd things, behave abnormally, that is. Maybe they'd come down for some water, I had to think. Elk always moved this time, late of day, almost dark even. They often preferred the fresh water or the flowing streams to the ponds sometimes. In the gloomy darkness, deep within the abyss of the trees, I saw shadows silently moving, and gracefully indeed. It was the elk's whimsical herd. My flint
created flame was just now taking off as a cool breeze exploded into it, all by expanding itself into some dry grasses that I'd managed to find out on the tundra before the herds had eaten it all. I had some hardtack and many slices of buffalo jerky from the last raid I'd made on the soldiers' camp. No need to kill anything tonight, as I just wanted to rest my tired bones around a warm, growing fire. I unrolled my once stolen bedroll and laid it out in a flat spot where I could be comfortable watching the fire or anything I might like. Sometimes I enjoyed staring at the moon and studying its lunar features. Once I even thought I'd seen a smiling face on it, but somehow I lost sight of it forever, perhaps. The end.